Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life.
So I want you to imagine you're an 82-year-old man, right?
Yeah, I'm picturing it.
And you have voted in literally every single election since John F. Kennedy.
Wow. That's a lot of elections.
Right. But you've just moved into an assisted living facility and, you've never had a passport. Nobody has any idea where your original birth certificate is from, like 8 decades ago.
Yeah, of course not.
And you certainly don't have the computer skills to navigate some complex digital portal to order a new one.
Right, which makes total sense for an 82-year-old.
Exactly. But suddenly, under a proposed new law, your lifelong right to cast a ballot it's completely gone.
Man, that's a heavy thought.
It is. Welcome to our custom deep dive. We are so excited to have you here with us today because today we are looking at the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, which is better known as the Save America Act.
Right, the Save America Act.
Yeah, and we're looking at how this single piece of legislation is just tearing through Washington, D.C. right now, causing absolute chaos. So we're going to help you cut through all the noise and get straight to the essential insights.
Because it's a story that goes far beyond just simple voting rules. I'm actually sitting here looking at my notes, and I've got this visual in my head of the U.S. Capitol blueprints, right?
Please.
Because what we are really looking at is a profound collision. It's this massive friction between national political messaging happening up in the Capitol and the sheer unforgiving logistical reality on the ground in all 50 states.
Definitely. But before we go any further, I want to make something very clear to you, the listener.
Yeah, this is really important.
It is. So the sources we are drawing from for today's deep dive include reporting from The Hill, MSNBC, and Democracy Docket.
Right.
And because this legislation deals with voting rights and election integrity, the material is, frankly, highly politically charged. It spans perspectives from the conservative right wing all the way to the progressive left wing.
Very wide spectrum of opinions.
Exactly. So I need to say this firmly. Neither of us here at the table are taking any political sides today.
None at all.
Our mission is strictly, completely impartially, to report the factual claims, the direct quotes, and the perspectives contained in this source material. We are not endorsing any of these viewpoints.
We're really just trying to convey the ideas so you can walk away fully informed.
Right, just giving you the tools to understand it yourself. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because to understand what is happening right now, we have to start by looking at the political pressure cooker in D.C.
Oh, it is boiling over right now.
It really is. We have a massive fight happening over a bill that essentially everyone in the room acknowledges is not going to become law.
Yeah, it's wild, right? That is the defining paradox of this whole thing.
Right. The Save America Act is facing a 60-vote Democratic filibuster in the Senate. Democrats have expressed zero interest in supporting it. So mathematically, under the current Senate rules, it is a doomed bill.
Dead on arrival.
Exactly. And yet, it is causing this intense infighting within the Republican Party.
Yeah.
According to the reporting, President Trump has issued this staggering ultimatum.
Right, the veto threat.
Yeah, he said, pass the Save America Act or he will veto all other legislation. He is openly threatening to withhold support from any Republicans who don't comply.
Which is forcing some really extraordinary tactical demands from his allies in the Senate.
Like what?
Well, you have senators like Mike Lee from Utah and Eric Schmidt from Missouri pushing for what is called a talking filibuster.
Okay, wait.
Yeah, Senator Schmidt even evoked the classic Jimmy Stewart movie, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Oh, of course he did.
Right. To justify this, arguing that Republicans should just hold the Senate floor for days or even weeks based purely on conviction.
Okay, but we hear the word filibuster all the time. Let's clarify the mechanics for a second.
Right.
What is the actual difference between the modern filibuster and the talking one that Schmidt is demanding?
So in the modern Senate, a filibuster doesn't actually require anyone to stand there and talk until they literally collapse.
Like they do in the movies.
Exactly. Because of a dual-track system they implemented decades ago, simply just the threat of a filibuster means a bill requires a 60-vote supermajority.
To invoke cloture.
Right, which is just the fancy D.C. term for ending debate and forcing a vote.
Got it.
If you don't have those 60 votes, the bill just gets shelved and the Senate moves on to other business. It's very quiet.
But Schmidt and Lee don't want quiet.
No, not at all. They are demanding a return to the grueling physical theater of the old days. They want to force members to physically hold the floor, halt all other government business, and create this massive public spectacle.
Wow.
Yeah. Senator Lee even called the idea of quietly accepting a failed vote a suicidal move for the party.
But then you have other Republicans looking around and questioning this entire strategy, right?
Oh, heavily.
Because Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina, he called this exact dynamic a circular firing squad.
Which is a pretty vivid image.
Yeah. And you have anonymous senators, along with Senator Jim Justice of West Virginia, expressing just deep frustration. Justice straight up called it theater, meant purely to play to constituents.
Right. He pointed out that Congress currently has a dismal 14% approval rating.
Like, why do this when everyone already hates what we're doing?
Exactly. Meanwhile, Senate Majority Leader John Thune is he's just trying to navigate the tension.
Yeah, the sources said he's staying publicly neutral, flashing a thumbs up to reporters and saying his main priority is just keeping the majority.
It is a vivid snapshot of a totally divided conference.
It really is. It feels like watching a football team argue aggressively over a trick play in the huddle, even though there are only 2 seconds left on the clock and they're down by 50 points.
That's a great analogy.
Right. Why are they threatening to primary their own colleagues over a bill that is universally acknowledged to be blocked by a 60-vote Democratic filibuster?
What's fascinating here is that this internal divide isn't actually about the core concept of the Save America Act.
It's not.
No, it's fundamentally about the Senate rules themselves, specifically the filibuster.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, pushing this doomed bill exposes a massive structural fracture. The hardliners see this as an existential fight. They want to blow up the Senate rules, eliminate the 60-vote threshold entirely, to force this legislation through with a simple majority.
But the pragmatists don't want to do that.
Exactly. The pragmatists in the party are terrified of the long-term repercussions. They are looking down the road, realizing that if they eliminate the filibuster now, what happens when Democrats inevitably regain the Senate majority in the future?
Right. Republicans would have absolutely no mechanism to check Democratic priorities.
Precisely. The Save America Act is just the catalyst forcing the party to decide what kind of Senate they want to leave behind.
So the bill is essentially the weapon being used in a much larger war.
Yeah.
Okay, but the procedural fight over how to pass the bill is only half the story. The fight over what is actually in the legislation is causing just as much friction.
Absolutely.
Let's look at the mechanics of the bill itself. The base text is relatively straightforward in its objective, right? It mandates that voters provide documentary proof of citizenship when registering to vote, and they must present a photo ID at the polling place.
Right. And if the bill had stopped there, the debate would look very, very different.
But it didn't stop there.
No. Senator Schmidt sponsored several amendments demanded by Trump that drastically expanded the scope of the bill.
What kind of amendments?
Things like dramatically restricting mail-in voting, prohibiting transgender athletes from participating in women's sports, and banning gender reassignment surgery for minors.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's almost like ordering a simple cheese pizza, right?
Okay.
But then someone demands you add sushi and ice cream on top of it.
Yikes.
And suddenly half the room absolutely doesn't want to eat it.
Yeah, exactly.
Why bolt these specific cultural issues onto an election logistics bill? What is the tactical purpose behind doing that?
Well, it's a classic legislative maneuver known as a messaging bill, or sometimes a poison pill, depending on your perspective.
Okay, explain that.
By attaching highly polarizing cultural issues like transgender sports bans to an election security bill, the hardliners are trying to force vulnerable senators to take tough, on-the-record votes ahead of an election cycle.
So it's a trap.
Basically. They are betting that voting against the entire package can be weaponized in a primary campaign. They can go to the voters and say, look, this senator voted against election security AN, voted to allow transgender athletes in women's sports.
It compresses complex legislative reality into a potent campaign soundbite.
Exactly.
And it immediately triggered internal pushback from lawmakers who just do not want to be put in that position.
Right.
Like Senator Tillis complained that adding transgender issues spreads the bill way too thin. He argued it gives Republicans more to explain to voters, which, in his own words, makes him cranky.
I mean, when you stack unrelated ideological demands onto a single piece of legislation, you force lawmakers to defend every single provision.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But the cultural issues weren't even the biggest sticking point for some Republicans.
Really? What was?
The mail-in voting ban. It hit a massive wall with geographic realities.
Right. Rural Republicans, like Senator Steve Daines and Tim Sheehy of Montana, they completely balked at the mail-in bans.
Because of the rural voters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They had to force a compromise for a hardship exemption. And then Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska pointed out the absolute logistical nightmare this creates for her state.
Oh, Alaska's a whole different ballgame.
She noted that 83% of Alaskan communities are not connected by road.
Wow, 83%.
Yes. So, to you listening right now, picture yourself living in a remote Alaskan village. There are literally no roads connecting you to a county clerk's office. You rely entirely on bush planes and ferries, and the federal government suddenly announces that mail-in voting is banned.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it perfectly illustrates the clash between nationalized ideological demands and localized practical realities.
Yeah.
A sweeping ban on mail-in voting might poll incredibly well as a national talking point for a specific political base. But when that abstract national ideology crashes into the rugged topography of Montana or the frozen tundra of Alaska, it functionally disenfranchises people.
Right. The senators representing those specific topographies have to push back because their constituents physically cannot comply with the national mandate.
Exactly.
But passing the bill in D.C. is just a theoretical part. If we look at the people who actually have to execute this, the state secretaries of state, the conversation shifts entirely from political theater to sheer logistical panic.
It really does.
According to the election administrator cited in the sources, if this bill were to magically bypass the filibuster and become law, it would mean instant chaos.
Their perspective is drastically different from the lawmakers debating the bill, because they are the ones legally responsible for making the actual machinery of democracy function.
So let's talk about those logistics. What does this actually mean for you as a voter if your state has to do this? The sources point out that this bill demands instant compliance right before the 2026 midterms.
Which is very fast in government time.
Insanely fast. And it offers absolutely zero federal funding to help states upgrade their systems. Plus, it includes criminal penalties for election officials who make mistakes.
Yeah, the lack of funding is huge.
Washington Secretary of State Steve Hobbs noted that implementing this would cost his state $35 to $40 million just for the upcoming midterms.
Wow.
Plus, another $20 million just to update their voter database to handle the new documentary requirements. He has actually vowed to file an immediate lawsuit if the bill passes.
To put that lack of funding into perspective, we have to look back at the Help America Vote Act, or HAVA.
Right, from 2002.
Yeah, passed after the chaotic Bush versus Gore election. When the federal government mandated sweeping upgrades to voting machines and registration databases back then, they provided the states with nearly $3 billion to make it happen.
$3 billion.
Yes. The Save America Act expects an even more massive logistical overhaul of state databases, but demands the states absorb the entire cost themselves practically overnight.
Okay, but I have to play devil's advocate here. I really have to push back on this framing.
Sure, go ahead.
Isn't it fundamentally the job of a state election official to verify who is voting? I mean, checking IDs is standard practice for boarding a plane, opening a bank account, or, just buying a beer. Are these state officials just complaining about a mountain of new paperwork and costs? Or is this a fundamental structural threat to how Americans cast their ballots?
This raises an important question, it really does, because it is the scale, the timeline, and the specific type of documentation required that elevates this from just a standard administrative task to a full-blown crisis.
Okay, how so?
Well, Connecticut Secretary of State Stephanie Thomas gave some incredibly concrete examples to explain the human cost of this administrative burden.
Like what?
Take a divorced woman trying to update her voter registration after changing her last name back to her maiden name.
Happens all the time.
Right. Under the Save America Act, she cannot just show her current driver's license. She would have to track down multiple cascading legal documents, a birth certificate, a marriage license, a divorce decree, just to prove an unbroken chain of identity and citizenship to the state all over again.
Oh, man. Which brings us back to the 82-year-old man we talked about at the very beginning of the deep dive.
Exactly.
If he doesn't have a passport, and he doesn't have the internet literacy to request an official birth certificate from a hospital in another state that might not even exist anymore, he is blocked from the ballot box.
Yes.
Simply because he cannot produce the right specific document at the exact right time.
And Minnesota's Secretary of State Steve Simon points directly to historical precedent to prove this isn't just a theoretical fear.
Oh, really? When has this happened before?
He brings up the 2011 Kansas SAFE Act.
Okay.
Kansas instituted strict documentary proof of citizenship requirements, very, very similar to what is proposed in this federal bill. The result was that over 31,000 eligible American citizens were blocked from registering to vote.
31,000 eligible citizens.
Yes. It wasn't that these people weren't citizens, it was the sheer administrative friction. If a voter has to pay $25 to request a birth certificate from 3 states away, wait 6 weeks for it to arrive in the mail, and then physically present it at an office during working hours, thousands of people simply won't make the registration deadline.
Right. People are busy, people have jobs.
Exactly. That law was eventually struck down by federal courts, but the precedent of mass disenfranchisement through administrative burden is a documented historical fact.
And Secretary Simon was incredibly blunt about the federal government's role in this, too. He warned about the bill forcing states to share unredacted private voter data with the executive branch.
Yeah, that data sharing is a huge red flag for state officials.
He noted that the Department of Justice is actually already suing secretaries of state to get access to this data. He literally compared the federal government's attempt to instantly interfere with state election administration to a bomb threat.
And that phrase bomb threat synthesizes the core constitutional tension at play here. Under the U.S. Constitution, states have the primary authority to administer their own elections.
Right.
So what we are seeing is a massive battle over who controls the machinery of democracy. The states are loudly warning that an unfunded, instant federal mandate paired with aggressive data demands from the federal executive branch and the threat of criminal penalties for local poll workers, is a guaranteed recipe for nationwide electoral chaos.
They view it as a hostile federal takeover of a state-run system.
Exactly.
It really brings into focus the incredible disconnect between the rhetoric in the Capitol and the reality in the county clerk's office.
Total disconnect.
D.C. politicians are aggressively debating the blueprints, threatening to primary each other over procedural tactics, and attaching ideological amendments. Meanwhile, the people actually tasked with building the house are screaming that the timeline is impossible, the materials aren't funded, and the design itself will cause the roof to collapse on the voters.
The chasm between the political theater of passing a messaging bill and the logistical reality of executing a law could not be more stark.
Absolutely. Well, as we wrap up this custom deep dive, I want to remind you, our listener, once again, that our goal today was purely an exercise in extracting the facts, the history, and the perspectives from the provided sources.
Yep, just laying it all out.
From the right-wing demands for stricter security and constitutional hardball, to the left-wing and administrative warnings of voter suppression and logistical collapse, we wanted to leave you equipped with a true 360-degree view of this controversy, entirely impartially.
And as you look at all of those angles, consider a final, lingering thought that builds on everything we discussed today.
Okay, let's hear it.
If a piece of legislation is universally acknowledged by its own party as impossible to pass, and election officials across the country say it's functionally impossible to implement, what does it say about our current legislative process that this bill might still consume weeks of the nation's time and energy? We have to ask ourselves, has the theater of debating a bill officially become more politically valuable to our representatives than the actual passage of a functional law?
Wow. That is the exact kind of question we want you to chew on. Thank you so much for joining us in this custom deep dive. We love unpacking these complex issues for you, and we encourage you to keep questioning the information around you, looking past the political theater, and searching for how things actually work on the ground. Until next time.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.